I'm Jess, and I'm a painter, and I kind of currently describe my work as sculptural multi-layered painting, and I'd like to kind of talk about the experiences and influences that have led to my current practice. So this is me in front of one of my current works in progress. I'm kind of going to go into where these works kind of found their roots, so back in childhood and in early experiences. So my early creative memories are kind of bound up with adventure and taking trips to my auntie's beach house, which we called the Shack. We spent lots of this time walking out to the beach and making kind of weird, abstract kind of creations most of the time. We did lots of walks out to this shipwreck that was about 1 kilometre away. So we'd have to kind of pull ourselves through this mud, often using these sticks to get us out. And on these trips, we'd often dig under the sand and find this natural clay, which we'd take back with us and fire in a pit fire in the evenings. So when we kind of got back, we'd sit and obviously make these creatures, make these creations. And this kind of started my interest in pottery. So I started these classes, and actually that's my head. So I did these for like a very long time, and I ended up kind of teaching these kids and kind of being a support for them, I guess, later on. So after that, I kind of also did this work experience where I actually went to the kind of studio where all of these potters were making their pots and all of the things that they'd sell in the front of the shop. And I learned loads about process and about kind of firing in kilns and glazes. And so these pieces that I made during that time are rubbed with oxides, which I can't even remember what was in them, but they changed colour when they were fired. So I guess that work kind of linked to where I went like further with that. So my kind of love of process and love of creating came all from back there. So obviously I did GCSE art, GCSE A-level, all of those kind of things, but I really feel like my kind of passion started when I did my foundation course. So this is one of my first pieces I did at Camberwell. So I guess this time really did focus my mind. I felt like it was defining the experience. So I was kind of dabbling in painting through school, and it ended up becoming the focus of what I did in my foundation course. I guess I moved away from the clay, but I still kept that interest in process and interested in making. So I started off sticking to what I knew, which was painting figures and painting people in landscape, which linked to, I guess, all the time I spent at the seaside as a kid. But these images, like even here, are kind of intended to paint in the bodies of these people, but I guess I didn't, and I can kind of see now that I was interested in layering and interested in depth and distance. So quickly I moved on. This is a piece by Katie Moran. It's an awful picture because I couldn't find anything better online. But this was the first painting that really captivated me. So in the first few weeks of being on this like painting rotation, I went to see loads of exhibitions. We went to about at least 3 a week at the time, and we were getting just stimulated by this wealth of material and wealth of experience. And this particular painting was in the Victoria Mirror. I actually can't remember what the exhibition, whether it was just skating around or whether it had other painters in it. But we were there for about half an hour, and I know I stood in front of this painting for about 20 minutes. At the time, one of my tutors described it as delicious, which I kind of never thought about kind of tasting painting or any of that kind of thing, but it kind of really connected to me. And I started to kind of be really interested in the beauty in abstract painting and the language of painting. So I felt like this work was really stripped back to its rawest form, and it wasn't about necessarily an image, it was more about the process of painting. So out of all of these experiences, I started to make works that they were abstract, but they were informed by instances of kind of people in their kind of personal and comfortable environment. I guess the subject of these works wasn't overly important, and I don't think I didn't create these works really needing any kind of starting point that was really explicit. I wasn't really connected to, I guess, the pictures that I'd taken, these close-ups of people in their environments. I was just more interested in the process of painting. And so I created more of these pieces, and I think here I started to become interested in fabric and in the way I could sandwich these bits of fabric under glass and then paint on top, and how that would create different distances, different layers and texture. And around this time I went to this talk they had at Camberwell that was on the expanded field of painting, and I felt really inspired by learning that I didn't have to make a painting on the wall to be a painter. It was the way that I felt about the way I was creating and the way I was making work. That's what made me a painter. So the talk was informed by Jessica Stockholder, who I guess most of you will know her work. And as well as really loving what she did, I really understood that she felt she was a painter because of the manner in which she created these works. So I really connected to this idea, and I wanted to create works that weren't bound by four corners, and that they, I guess, transcended the frame in that sense. And this really became a focus of these works. I guess this theme kind of, it continued, and I started to make works on a larger scale that kind of gave me more space to play with the idea of fabric as part of the painting. This piece didn't have any glass in it, it was just a piece of board which I kind of sculpted this piece of fabric into a kind of strange shape, which I used as a, I guess, structure for me to paint around and in and on. So using oils at this time was really new to me, and I hadn't ever been taught this kind of painting through school. I was kind of really new to this stuff. And I had a friend, Kirsty, who's not here today, but she really taught me about colour and about what mediums I could mix with paint to do different things, and I became really interested in that. So right at the end of my experience at Camberwell, I suddenly kind of, at the time my granddad had dementia, and this was about 8 years down the line, and I kind of managed to find a subject where I could create a painting that felt really personal to me, because I guess I hadn't felt connected to the reason behind I was making this work. And I guess this gave me a kind of connection, I guess, to the subject. So this was the image that I used to create the painting, and it's of him at home in an environment where he felt comfortable and safe. And this is the painting that came out of it. the element of sculpture in this painting is really important, and the fabric I used was kind of related to the sofa that was in this scene. I felt that I'd really learnt something here about the fact that I really wanted my works to connect to my life, and I kind of didn't know how to take that forward. So the work that I actually ended up making at university didn't actually feel like it connected to these important things to me. I think I kind of lost this as I went along, and I feel like I've returned to it actually at my time at Phoenix. So this was one of the first works that I made at Brighton University in my first year. This first year was kind of a learning curve, because I guess we were all trying to balance still making work but also living away from home and not really. I guess I didn't actually make very much work, to be honest. I wasn't really that connected to actually being at university or like doing that. I guess the ideas were still like ticking over, and I was still getting somewhere, but I was clearly the subject was always changing. I was starting to do these works because I just moved to the seaside, and it was the subject that I had to my fingertips. So I guess the idea of expanded painting and the importance of that was still in full flow when I was at university, especially in my first year. This was a collage of different photos that I'd taken. I think this scene was in Rottingdean. And I was layering these works and then making paintings from these collages. So I would take each element, paint them either in a block colour or in a kind of more painterly style, and then once I'd finished that, I'd put them all together and spend at least a week trying to find the right combination. So this actually isn't a piece of work that ended up being an actual painting that I'd actually stuck together. It was just a collage. And the same with this one. I feel like it was kind of an interesting time, because I realised here that the subject of the work wasn't connected to the end result, because I wasn't depicting a seascape or a scene, because I'd mixed up all of these different elements and it had become something else. It wasn't connected to its starting point. So I feel like the collages that I made in the first instance were a completely separate body of work. That was actually a piece that became a painting. I think that's the only one that I liked out of the series, probably. But I felt like I created this work in a painterly way, but it was sculptural, and it did come away from the wall, and it was a work that had a real presence in the space, and it did move into the space, into the viewer space. So that's my studio at the end of that year. As you can see, there's not a load of painting, but there's enough. At the end of that year, I went to Berlin, and I saw loads of work at that time, which I didn't kind of realise before, but looking through all of these things that I've seen, I can see how it relates to the work that I'm doing now. So all of these things I've picked up and really realised how much of an impact they had. Especially this piece, which includes the element of sewing and stitching, which is now a massive part of my practice. So over that summer, I was making these kind of drawings which hadn't really got anything to do with anything. They were kind of like just from my brain, and they weren't of anything at all. They were completely made up. And in my second year, I moved away from this idea of expanded painting, and I moved back to kind of learning how to just paint on canvas and just create depth, texture and layers by just using paint in different mediums and things that I could add to it to create a work like this. I think this was a really important step to take at this time. So lots of these works used repetitive lines and drawing, which I guess I've always needed something to anchor the work, to be as like a starting point that I can create a composition around. And I feel like at that time that was almost like my crutch. It's like the seascapes that I'd been making collages out of first, they were the starting point. So this kept changing year on year. I think this is a piece that I made towards the end of my second year. I was starting to lose the element of drawing, I guess, towards the end. It became more about the paint and more about different brushes and different mediums. So moving on to my third year, I lost the drawing completely. These were all paintings that were, the basis of these was that I needed a ground and a layer that I could work against and with. So I'd have these grounds that had these kind of geometric shapes or lines on them, which I could then paint on top of and react to that surface. So I continued with these, and I guess I was starting to get bored. I felt like I was getting as much as I kind of could out of the process of layering and out of the process of actually just painting on a canvas. This is one of the last pieces I did before I really got bored and started to add other things into the mix. I feel like the colours here, I'd learnt so much about colour and so much about how painting's an aesthetic and how you can really appreciate the texture of the paint and the way I've actually painted that on the surface. So this was one of my pieces that I think was in my degree show, but I'd started to submerge bits of PVC into the ground, which I felt created a different layer and a different texture that I could, again, react with. It's all about me trying to react with something and trying to layer. And so the paint obviously went onto the surface very differently when it was on plastic. I don't necessarily feel like these works were what I wanted them to be, but I knew at this point that it was really moving somewhere kind of completely different. So I could feel myself moving back into this idea of expanded painting, and I was bored with the flat surface. I was bored with this texture. I guess I'd say that I like these works, and I feel like I learned a lot about me as a painter, but I don't think I was excited by them. So that's all of them in the degree show. So at the end of this year, we found out that we were moving into our studio at Phoenix, which was really exciting, but I guess really scary, because we were put into this empty studio that we had to fill with loads of new work and new exciting stuff, which we kind of hadn't done before. So at this time I was like, I've been searching for a job for about a month with not much luck, and I guess it made the process of starting to work here really hard, because I was coming in every day, but maybe just sitting there and staring out the window. So the first thing I did was buy a really cheap portable sewing machine. I knew that I wanted to move back to this idea of expansive painting, but I didn't want to use the MDF like I'd done in my first year of university. I wanted to carry on using canvas and to use something that was softer and more malleable, and that I could really move with my hands. I kind of wanted to create these layers with these smaller works, and I guess these were me trying to plan how I was going to ever attempt to make a work that was bigger. So I was adding to this, I guess, again, a collage of small works. And I think these works started off as a kind of plan for a larger painting, but they ended up I think works in their own right, and they kind of can stand alone and stand in a group, obviously like this, and be quite powerful. So after this, I started to make paintings that I kind of call basic collages. I didn't really know how to use my sewing machine. I was kind of playing with that, and I was also cutting up elements of works that I did at university and adding these back into these new works. So I wasn't having to go back and make these really layered, really aesthetic paintings that took me a long time. I could just rip those old ones apart and shove them on a new bit of canvas and paint around them. So I think these old paintings, it allowed me to keep that element of like painterly marks and of these colours that I'd really, I guess, got out of those works that I made at university. This was another work that was, I guess, one of the more simple collages. Still learning about process, and I was kind of still painting over mistakes and painting over things that weren't working, and I kind of wanted to move away from that. I wanted to be able to stick something over it and kind of cover it up completely. And so I just started to do it. I worked on this painting for probably about 4 months. It had many layers underneath, and I was just kept adding new bits of canvas and kept pasting them over the top, and it became really thick and really, really sculptural because there were bumps and cracks, and it was really kind of a weird surface it ended up being. So after being on a roll for a few months, I think this was probably around November I made this painting. Around this time, my granddad passed away suddenly in December, and in that month, around that time, I didn't use the studio very much, and I felt that the ideas were still ticking over and I was still thinking about the work, but it felt the wrong time to be making work. And I guess this kind of period in my painting really linked back to what I learned about what I was doing at Camberwell. I felt that the process of trauma really made me think about layering, and how me creating these works was almost covering up old wounds and covering up, I guess, history in a way, but that it was still visible because you can still see the elements of the painting that are underneath, but that, like my life experiences, cover up old ones, and we kind of move on and things change. So during this process, I guess I really learnt that my mood affects my paintings, and as they become layered, like my life becomes layered, things happen that cover up these things, and you get new experiences, and things become fresh again, almost like, I guess, like a rebirth or something. So I feel like these paintings were really reflective. So although this is not one of my favourite paintings that I've made this year, I kind of started this just before he died and finished it in February, and I felt like it really said something about the way I deal with things that happen in my life, and the way that I get through things, and the way that maybe my painting is therapy, or kind of a way of looking after myself. This is one of quite a late painting, actually. I only finished it a few months ago, and it feels like I've come a long way since then, because I've not only started to paste things on top and add new layers and new surfaces, I've also started to cut back into these works and cut holes in them and take them off the stretcher and force them back through the sewing machine, and kind of, I guess, create another new surface. So with there being all of these layers, there's also something fresh and new. I guess in that way, I've given them a new life and a breath of fresh air. So that's a close-up of that painting, some of the areas that I feel were really successful and really showed the amount of work and the amount of time that I'd spent on these pieces. So these two are my current works in progress. That one's still in my studio, kind of not sure where to go with it now. But these works have kind of showed that my time at Phoenix has felt really reflective and really, I think I've really had time to work on these pieces without feeling pressure and without feeling watched by people like I did for 3 years. And I think that being able to share these experiences with Sophie and not on my own in this studio meant that we could really kind of compare notes and really support each other through kind of the process of our work changing completely. So in this like supportive and creative environment, I think that it's made leaving university not quite as scary as everyone thought it would be. And that actually, it's amazing to be an artist because you can be part of this community of people who all support each other, I guess, like it is tonight, and how we can all help each other learn and do new things. So that's it.
About, what colour, what shape, what... It couldn't say anything about how you make those choices.
In terms of colour, I've always been interested in opposite colours reacting to each other and almost having a fight or being friends. So I always like to create works that have a bit of that push and pull and always have something interesting going on colour-wise. I guess that's where the kind of colour comes from, is my interest in how opposing colours look next to each other. And I think in terms of shape and space, I used to be really geometric and really liking these straight edges, but me and Sophie being in a studio together, her works are really bodily and really curvy, and I really enjoyed those shapes, and I guess probably those kind of things have come from there. So I guess in that sense they are connected to the body, but not explicitly. But they definitely inform the shapes that I make and the cuts that. Also, if I cut into the canvas, it's because I hate a certain piece, or a certain section. So I'll just cut around that, kind of getting rid of it, throwing it away.
The other question was about the titles, because they're very not elaborate, but they're very definite titles, aren't they?
Yeah.
Just landscape or...
No.
So how do you choose your titles?
So the pieces at university, I couldn't name anything really at that time, but I really enjoyed bingo calls about like people rhyming numbers with someone shouting something. So I kind of was making up my own, also using some that I found online, but I kind of enjoyed that kind of playful element. And I guess very differently, but the works now are about personal experience and are about, I guess, feelings and emotion and how I felt at the time, or how I felt at the end of making this work. I guess that's where the names come from now.
Did you go and see the Annie Albers exhibition at the Tate Modern? Because quite interesting how you were sort of, I mean, it's just an observation, Annie and Joseph Albers, of course, connected, but your work seems to connect with both of them.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I didn't see those shows, which I should have done. But I definitely agree. And I think also, I did go to see Jess Phillips' show at Harold Street in London, which really connected to me. And I really fell in love with her work. and you actually create.
What are you going to do next then? I know I'm laughing.
I thought about it for ages, but I think I'm going to move back to London, that's where I'm from, and get another studio. That's always the priority. So I think more than being able to live on my own, I think I need a studio. So that's what I'm going to do. Kind of find friends that I was at university with and kind of muscle in them or whatever they're doing.
Is there anything you haven't tried yet in your work that you're wanting to have a go at?
I think they're about to come off the stretcher and not be paintings anymore. I think probably they'll end up looking like sculpture. I'll feel that they're painting, but I think they won't be bound by these corners anymore. I think that's really where I want them to kind of move towards. I guess it's just having the courage to just rip them off.
I was going to ask, do you paint large areas of fabric and then cut that, or are you sort of casting up old work constantly? I mean, I like the existentialism, but I mean, you actually destroy everything in your plans to create the future.
Yeah, kind of.
It's those degree show things, of course, but you might have just chopped them all up, or...
I still have those. But I don't know how much longer I'm going to have them for. I have to keep myself from touching them because I might destroy them.
It's just that when you're your age, it's everything seems like, I'm just going to...
I think, there definitely is.
It's rubbish, and now I'm going to move on to the next thing. And you cut it up, and it's like we're all looking at it being a bit older, not all of it, a bit older, but we're sort of looking thinking, God, the heck of it. And if you are chopping them up to make something better and move forward, that's great, but it's just, I'm just wondering how far you go with chopping.
I think I keep works that I felt were really successful.
That's a few from me.
That's how I do it. So I keep, I guess I've still got those degree show pieces, but all the things that didn't work, I want to reuse, because otherwise I feel like I'm just wasting it, and they'll just sit in some shed somewhere and they'll never see the light of day again.
Also paint canvas, and then it's like to make work from as well.
Yeah. So most of it won't be old paintings. It's just small sections that I use to kind of work as a structure and something to start the composition. I also use the kind of stitching lines to create a composition to start with, and I just paint each section. So I will stitch together all kind of raw canvas and stitch a few pieces of old paintings in there, and then paint my first layer, and then take them off again and keep sticking raw bits of canvas on top, which I'll then work on top of. So a lot of it is new work. I just like to have something old to just start the process. Yeah.
Sort of recycling eco-painting.
Almost.
Yeah, it makes me think of Matisse's cutouts and also Alberto Burri. And I just wondered who are your artists that you sort of really admire? Who are your favourite artists at the moment?
So a lot of this work, I guess, is more linked to contemporary artists, and Jessica Stockholder, as I said, and Jessie Yates. I also love Amy Silman, who I went to see her show that was at Camden Arts Centre that was amazing, and I really, really loved that work. I guess right now those are the people that are really, really have an influence on me.
Right, that's fantastic.
Righty-ho, everybody. Part two. Oh, that's good. It's Sophie. Welcome. Three.
Hello, so I'm Sophie, and this is me by me probably about 18 or 19 years ago. Artistically, I've hopefully come on a little basis then, but my primary inspiration is still the human body. I'm endlessly curious about people, our biology, our psychology, and how these two elements interact. I'm totally fascinated by how our body impacts our sense of self, and in turn how our psychology can be translated through our biology. I got asked quite a lot at Open Studios whether the figures that I draw now are self-portraits, and they're not in the physical sense, but I suppose they could be considered portraits of people through my experience of being one, because they are inward-looking in that way. So jump forward a little bit, and this is a quite disgusting portrait my mum I did. She's not got a really long neck in real life. Beside a drawing I did a couple of weeks ago. And I only really realised the similarities when I was preparing for this talk. Why do they have such long necks and really prominent hands? And I love necks. I draw them a lot. They are, I suppose, interesting for me for lots of reasons. Partially because it's the pathway between the mind and body, which is kind of a key element of my work. They can be seen sensual, I think they look quite elegant, and it's the origins of your voice. But primarily I find necks interesting because it's where I feel sadness and worry. I really feel it in my neck. I take the kind of the saying, a knot in your throat. What's the saying? lump in your throat. Takes it really literally. I really feel that. Stress feels to me a lot like this, and it can kind of take over, and it feels quite like you've lost yourself in it. But somehow attaching a kind of light-hearted narrative, a stupid narrative, to kind of quite big ideas kind of breaks them down and makes them much more accessible. So I started drawing necks to try and illustrate what this feeling would be like if part of our anatomy. The kind of what would the visual metaphor be for this feeling, and quite kind of anatomical or more symbolic ways. And I've probably done kind of hundreds of necks since, trying to kind of not even necessarily looking for an answer, but just exploring this idea. Similarly, hands crop up quite a lot in my work, and they're really important to me as symbols of emotion. I think that hands can be metaphors of feeling, and you can tell a lot by a static image of a character about how it's, I know it's not feeling, but you know what it supposedly is feeling by the gestation of its hands. I also really feel like my soul, if there is one, would sit in my hands. Like the weight of my meanness is in my hands. And everybody has different answers, and I've talked to friends about this. Some feel it in their heads, that makes sense. Or your chest, your stomach, maybe through your eyes. But it's asking these kind of questions and the range of answers that they provide that really drives my practice. I think it would be it's kind of relevant to reflect on where this slightly weird obsession with the body has come from my past, which might seem a little bit long-winded, but I think it's quite relevant. So obviously I'm very tall. It's something that you come to terms with more as you get older, but I've still not quite gotten used to the comments that I get from mostly strangers. I get approached very frequently and talked about like how my height and how tall I am, and worst of all, how big I am. And when that's kind of, now that's mildly annoying, but when you're like 13, 14, that can be quite damaging, I think. And made me kind of hyper aware of my physicality and size and the matter that I am, which in hindsight I've come to understand as a key element alongside kind of obviously other internal and external factors, as developing anorexia through school, kind of towards my GCSEs and A-levels. On the other side, the flip side, the positive of being really tall, is I really found my place in sport, and I've always massively benefited physically and mentally through staying active. And I get totally like drunk on endorphins from exercise, which is one of the kind of the best, I think, outcomes of this connection between mind and body. So it was kind of obsessive exercise in 2012, when I was probably at the worst point in my eating disorder, that led me to be diagnosed with heart disease, because I was at the time competing in running and swimming and rowing, and I was at the height of my physical fitness, but I began to think that I had asthma. I didn't. I don't have asthma. I went on to have open heart surgery when I was 18. This is me feeling weirdly happy beforehand and much sadder immediately afterwards. So I had open heart surgery when I was 18, and a few years later I got a pacemaker. And this, having been diagnosed with heart disease, sounds like a terrible thing, but actually it really marked the shift in a change of perspective from mental illness to physical illness. And sadly, one's much easier to kind of deal with. And I suppose I had kind of much more immediate worries when I was diagnosed with heart disease than weighing myself 5 times a day. So this shift, that this kind of like diagnosis that sounds like a terrible thing, actually ended up being entirely positive, although you wouldn't know it from looking at this. So my eating disorder, combined with a love of sport, that both were kind of connected to my physicality, in a sense diagnosed my heart disease at a kind of quite prominent time. And in turn, my heart disease offered me a pathway from mental illness. So I had a really heightened awareness from this experience of the connections that we have between our physical and our mental states. I'm really aware, obviously, that I'm only 23 now, so I'm still really, really young, and my experience is only very limited, and everybody has their own. Everybody in this room will have their own experiences with how their physicality has affected their mental health and vice versa. Like ageing, having children, or like illnesses and accidents, all kind of add to the tapestry that is our body and our experience within it. And each shape the landscape that is your sense of self within this kind of environment. And this is like a key underlying aspect of my work that I probably wouldn't exist had it not been for these few formative years. So though it sounds like it's quite traumatic, at the time you just deal with things, and in hindsight it's actually really enriched my kind of creative process. So a couple of months after having heart surgery, I started my foundation course at Kingston, which was fantastic. I had the best year. They have a really it's a really intense, full-on year, lots of short projects. So this is one of my favourite pieces that I made. I can't even really call it a piece without like irony, because it was a one-day project. These are vegetables. But this kind of momentum, the really fast way of working, really has kind of stuck with me. I still work really quickly and kind of produce a lot. And they have a really kind of research-focused ideology, which kind of still stuck with me. So that I then came to Brighton for my BA, and I studied illustration, which is it's a brief-led course. So it's visual communication. So you'll set projects where you have to kind of fit quite specific criteria. And I managed to do that throughout the first and second year using a huge range of visual outcomes, from quite traditional illustration like this, which is like pretty but a bit boring, to I tried hand by hand everything. So like embroidery, and I did animation, filmmaking, photography, papercraft, and loads of stuff. And I just picked up these two because they kind of show that I was still kind of like shoehorn in my interest of healthcare. This was a project about amnesia from like forgetting, what's it when you have general anaesthetic? Yeah, when you like just memory loss from general anaesthetic, and the rising cost of kind of healthcare in the US. But I was like trying to think like, oh, maybe if I start making models out of paper, maybe I'll be really good at it and I'll stick with it and I'll make everything out of paper forever. And it just nothing ever really stuck, and I'm still doing loads of different types of work all throughout my first and second year. And I think by the end of my second year I was feeling quite lost within my practice, and I felt this disconnect between what I was interested in, the type of work that I was making, and I felt a bit lost because nothing seemed very coherent. Third year opened up with much more creative freedom because we were able to kind of make up some of our own projects. And this is a part of a project that I did called Bodies of Botany, that where I was kind of thinking about parallels between the human figure and plant forms in quite a more loose and abstract way than the previous project had been set. And it actually culminated in this film of myself painting. So it's quite performative in the sense that I am part of the kind of the final frame along with the plants. It was quite kind of a milestone, thinking I don't need to necessarily illustrate a news article to kind of get a point across. Another kind of key project in my university, and one of my last projects that I made at my degree show, was a project that I did about skin. And I started off really wanting to highlight and explore and document all marks on the body that kind of collect like a residue of life as you kind of age. So things like birthmarks and moles, bruises, scars, wrinkles, even just the touch of yourself and your skin, all kind of collect that visual noise. And I started quite objectively kind of documenting these through loads of different ways, photography, imprint and drawing. And I was quite kind of keen to steer away from the whole kind of scars making beautiful rhetoric, because as somebody with a lot of big scars, I don't really identify with it. But it kind of seems obvious I end up using my own scars because my body's very conveniently here, so I can use it for parts of my project. It's easier than trying to get a frame, working a frame. So for example, here I painted, this is the contact sheet that I was sent to the printer, it's in test different colours. But I painted my entire body white, other than all the marks that are on it, all the moles, the scars, the scrapes, the scratches, the bruises, and they kind of wiped out all the rest of the negative space. Bit weird to do that on your friend, but on me, absolutely fine. But then obviously, that meant I had a great big zip down my front. This project kind of culminated in jewellery that I'd made, and I've made jewellery my entire life as a hobby, which I wear quite a lot of it. But I was quite keen to use it here as a communicative tool, because I think jewellery, a lot like skin, is interface between public and private. You wear it like you wear your skin, but I suppose much more voluntarily. So this necklace I've made out of these are resistors from radios, and I suppose in the kind of the linear aspect, kind of reflects surgical scars from surgery. And I'd made it just like a few years before this project. But it's a bit of a rubbish cliche, but it just felt like something kind of armoury about that kind of chest plate and feeling quite vulnerable there. So this project really kind of, for the first time, enabled me to reflect on my experiences and how they've influenced my work with a kind of objectivity and a distance. That means it's not sentimental, it's just objectively, I find it very interesting, and I have this personal experience. But I'm also very aware that so does everybody else have their own experiences. So then I found out I got into the Phoenix, the Pub Studio, and I finished my degree. And I think, like Jessie, we both felt quite overwhelmed and faced with a big white room, and no more briefs were set for me. I didn't really know what I was going to be doing here. This is one of the first paintings that I'd made in the Phoenix, and it's massive. Well, not that big, but pretty big still. And I think it's a little bit autobiographical in that I was feeling kind of a bit out my depth and overwhelmed, and these hands, like I was saying earlier, hands are very emotive to me, so that they seem a little bit kind of, I suppose that they're surrendering slightly. But it was really good to just get back painting, get back kind of making work. And I really love the process of making. I can't see myself ever making using a computer. I really like the actual physical process of it. And I love texture, so if you do these kind of like broad strokes across the bottom and the top, I've stuffed a roller full of tape so that it doesn't roll anymore, but then it creates really nice blunt kind of textures. And I paint quite a lot with paintbrushes on the end of bamboo sticks, so it can be quite a distance away. And I think all this, reflecting like why I'm doing this, I think it's partly because I really like the lack of control that enables. That I'm like slightly removed from the outcome. I also draw a lot using monoprint. So these are just a couple that I've done the past year, but I do kind of hundreds actually. They'll work really, really quickly. And I really like monoprint again because there's lack of control there. You can't faff about when you're printing. Every line that you make, as soon as you touch the back of a piece of paper, it's going to leave a mark. So then you have to be very forthright with your line making. And then kind of feeding into this, I love the kind of the relationship between the texture and the line, painting and then drawing on top, or kind of the other way around. I think a key shift in my my work at the Phoenix has been my use of sketchbooks since at university, using them for observational drawing, like stuff like this, to now silly drawings like these. And writing a lot. I've never really written before, and this year I've really kind of like jotting down scribbles. So these kind of like doodles, I really kind of value the importance of being really loose and uninhibited in your sketchbook, and just scribbling really stupid little drawings. And out of that can come really quite big work, can come out of the most flippant thought, the most flippant sentence. So here I've written, my body is where my hands meet my feet, and then it occurred to me, I wonder what kind of relationship a man with big hands would have with big feet. And it comes, this is a tiny little, like really, really light drawing that then fed into a piece of work that I really quite like. I think it's quite sweet. When you kind of remove preconceptions about the context of the body and how we feel within society and culturally about our bodies, really you're just left with building blocks that can allow you to be much more playful and reassemble the body any way you like, to say whatever you like. So this is a series that I've made since being at the Phoenix. And it's 3 parts. So the first one says, I'm a collection of blobs and long bits. I'm a big blob with long bits coming off it and small bits off the ends of those. Inside the big blob, there are other blobs and long bits, and we just have to hope they are okay in that. Which I think it's obviously a light-hearted approach to kind of an idea that's going to be more profound, because effectively we are just blobs and long bits with a voice inside. And I think this kind of this series kind of encapsulates the sense of helplessness that can come from that, because we don't have much physical control of our physicality. You're kind of, in a sense, you're at its whim. And this is an idea that I've kind of extended on a lot more since this is about January, because I've got the window gallery in August for a show. So since January, I've been kind of like tailoring my thoughts towards that. So I'm going to just go through for a little bit the kind of work, the process that I've been through about some of these ideas. So I've put it quite eloquently in my sketchbook. I said, there's me in the sense of a physical being that exists ignore that, I don't know what that word is. And there is me and myself that lives and thinks within it. The two are different but impact upon each other, empowering and implementing. So there's a contrast, I suppose, between your body and yourself, which really comes into focus when you experience illness. One hosts the other, but it's not necessarily black and white, I think, which is which. One of my best friends, Faye, put this quite well, because we've spoken about this quite a lot, because she's also experienced, she's got quite bad health at the minute, and we've spoken about this quite a lot, and she put it quite well once as saying that she sometimes feels like she's in control, and sometimes she feels like she's being dragged through the mud, which I think is quite kind of poignant, because that can be the reality of it, and that is just true. If you experience illness, it feels like you're at your body's mercy a little bit. So if you kind of think in this way, is health maybe the ship or the sea or an unruly rudder to the host that we are within? If you use this kind of, so I started kind of illustrating this idea using lines and mass as a metaphor for each element of the duality of your body. So the line is meant to represent the biological structures of the units that you can touch and see. and the mass. I hate the word blobs, but it's all I've managed to come up with. So the blobs are bits of you that you can't necessarily see, so your likes and dislikes, passions, relationships, how you feel about everything that you encounter. The you that would exist if you died, that people would still know of, is the blobs. And if you kind of take this example, you can think of the body in lots of different ways. Perhaps the soul blobs are kind of encapsulated, held by the body, like the one on the far left. Maybe they're kind of held more, supported by the body, but not like entirely wrapped up in it. Or they're kind of hinging off from, connected to the body, but not entirely dependent upon. Obviously, this is just kind of a thought experiment. But if you separate the body and the mind, and you treat the body like an outline, illness can be reduced to kind of a disobedient outline, and you can exist independently of it. And this is stupid stuff I wrote in my sketchbook. I didn't identify as, nobody identifies as their anatomy. And in case of illness, when my heart disease was a problem with my anatomy and not a problem with myself that needed fixing. Creating layers within an image can kind of document both of these aspects within a portrait of a person. So here the figure, the outline, doesn't quite match up with the blobs inside, doesn't really do them justice. But I suppose whenever you put kind of an outline over this kind of shape, they kind of identify organs. So I started wondering what meanness would look like if it wasn't figurative at all. And by separating the layers further, you kind of get a dual portrait here of the physical in the outline and the psychological, and both are as important as one another. Because without the outline, these would just be blobs, it could be a wallpaper. But without the kind of the context and the shape and the mass behind the images that are just an outline. Removing the outline entirely, the mass and the blobs kind of build up the figure, but also beyond, just as you exist within and extend beyond yourself. The entire world, from how you see it, is influenced by your life within the world. So working in this kind of sequential and explorative way yields a lot of visual research. I kind of work from my sketchbook, and then certain parts I pull out a bit like kind of stepping stones along my kind of exploration of an idea. And no like one image or experiment really answers the questions that I'm kind of putting to myself, but they're all a part of the conversation. I'm thinking through doodling and then pushing certain aspects further. And you could say that each new work is inspired by the failings of the one before, because I'm aware that kind of none of these are really doing what I'm wanting them to do, but each of them have then led on to the next one. I feel like this is kind of more where I am now. I'm looking outwards, making connections and seeing things in the world, and then kind of reflecting on how I feel them within. But I mostly just feel like I'm wrestling with ideas that are far too big to pin down. I think that it's like I'm trying to fit a square box into a circle hole. It's just not going to fit. But for me, I think the important thing is the asking of the questions, the discussion, the listening and learning. That's what really drives me, and what I hope one day my career to be made of. So as I approach the end of my residency at the Phoenix, I feel like my work is more authentic than ever, but it's left me occupying a loophole between an artist and an illustrator. I left university as an illustrator, but now I feel like the legibility of what I'm making is secondary to the process of me making it. I don't expect anybody to kind of look back at any of these and think, oh, that's the artist reflecting on connections in the world, because that'd be possibly weird if it did. But I feel like the process of my investigation is as relevant as the outcome, and in that sense my work is still performative, a bit like I was kind of doing at university. Although objectively, on the other hand, I'm not sure I've really got the kind of the craft or the skill to identify it as an artist. My work isn't worthy of sitting on a mantelpiece because that's not what it was designed to do. A lot like jewellery isn't designed to be in a gallery. It's kind of left me in limbo as a little head beyond the phoenix, not really knowing where I can find a place for myself in my work. But I do feel like what I'm doing is relevant and important, so it feels a bit kind of helpless in that sense. If anybody's got any ideas for jobs or residences, let me know. And this is a monoprint of me feeling. It feels to me like this kind of confused, like stance of like hands in the air, not really knowing what to do. On another one, like multiple levels of kind of confusion in your work and then within the world and where it sits. So I'd like to finish now, but I'm just going to finish on a painting that I made here several months ago, which is inspired by my friend Faye, who's been unwell. But it's also relevant to, well, everybody. And it says, I carry my health in a bag woven of optimism. The fabric is weak, but the stitches are strong. Ta-da.
Putting myself in the picture. She might be someone you might
I'll write down.
sort of resonate with. I mean, she's a photographer, but she made a whole body of work around the process of breast cancer and so on and so forth. But she was very much interested in the area you are in terms of the body misbehaving, you know, sabotaging, all that sort of thing. So,
yeah, I'll look into it. Thank you.
Are you and Jessie going to collaborate? I was really interested in the parallel between the figure and coming out of the figure and Jessie's sort of the expanded trio. I think you've had a really interesting year. I can sort of see there's been a real osmosis in your studio.
Now you can piece together.
Yeah,
yeah, I probably should. Yeah, I think both of us have felt we've changed from sharing a space. Like Jessie was saying, her shapes have got much more organic. And my colours just seem to reflect whatever Jessie's doing. She's much better at colour than me. And whatever colour she's doing, I'm like subconsciously thinking, ooh, green's looking quite nice. Yeah, we know, I think we definitely like stay artistically in touch with when you go to London.
You said about working really quickly, which lets us sort of immediacy in the images that you make that is like perfect, you know. But I just wondered, I don't really know what I'm asking, but I find your talk so brilliant. It's okay to let you go with that.
Yeah, I think I work really quickly because then you've got nothing to lose if you just kind of keep doing, if you do things over and over again. I do the same kind of bodies over and over again, and then I find sometimes one of them has a part that I think, oh, that's quite nice, I'll do that in the next one. And in that way, through, I suppose, just like probability, if you do 50 monoprints, 4 of them might be like something that you can take forward.
Yeah. So when you say take forward, what does that mean? That you will use that image again?
Yeah, or I just, I suppose I just think I've kind of hit upon ideas, something like falls out my brain, and I think like, oh, like where did that come from? But that's like interesting that I kind of did that. Like any of these, I've not planned. I didn't plan them. They just kind of happen, and then I think maybe in hindsight that is an interesting kind of a seed of a concept that I would like to take forward one day. I just don't know, I seem to have enough time to do it.
You mentioned that Phoenix changed you as an artist. Are you going to stay in Brighton or are you going to move?
I'm staying in Brighton. Woo! I don't know what I'm going to do yet, because like I was saying, I can't really see a space for myself, commercially or artistically, I feel like I really fall in the gap between the two. But I'm definitely going to stay in Brighton because I just love being here, and I kind of put like lifestyle over potentially career.
In a way, if you don't see, I think that's quite exciting. I mean, it's irritating when you don't see. It's important that you have the confidence to exist in the world, and it's. But if you don't see people doing what you're doing, and you can't figure out where you fit in, I actually think that's quite exciting.
Yeah.
Because
Maybe my Achilles heel this decade will be the like making of me next decade. I just got to stick it out a bit, maybe.
Well, someone like, say, Nancy Spiro, who is an American, you know, she's a draftswoman, is she an illustrator, is she an installation artist, is she, you know, she's constantly leaving those spaces open and allowing the viewer, if you like, to just engage with the sort of narrative of what she's doing, which, you know, you've got, your work is very strongly narrative. And in different layers. I mean, your blogs to me look quite medicinal. They look like lots of different, I don't know, pills and antibiotic type things. So there's, you know, there's almost a fetishization going on, which, you know, it adds another interest beyond the sort of playfulness, if you like. And Nancy Spiro definitely sort of looks and engages with that.
Yeah, I feel like it's something in Phoenix, I kind of scraped the surface of something that's been brewing for quite a long time, and that I've only now really had the time and the space to do so, and that I'm just kind of like seeing more and more that I'd like to like get involved in. And then in terms of actual image making, this is quite like a new way of working.
Well, it's brave work as well, you know, to expose yourself and make yourself out there in terms of your experiences and how you sort of connected that to an art practice. You shouldn't underestimate that.
Thank you.
Will your blogs ever like interact with the environment that you're in? So you take inspiration right before kind of your sport, and then the health is coming in. But those blogs interacting with the water, say, is that ever a route or a path you're
Well, the vlogs are quite a new thing. And it's just, so the vlogs to me are like an alphabet of a language, so you can kind of build them up. I quite like to my work off paper, because I always used to at university. I thought, in some essences, since being at Phoenix, because I am because I have got a room and a wall and a desk, maybe I've gone more kind of commercial in a sense that it's much more flat, where I used to be kind of, I didn't have that. I made lots of films, animation, and kind of maybe more diverse in that way. So maybe next year, having not got a space necessarily, maybe that's quite a good opportunity for me to take this kind of work and put it back out into the world. And essentially, it's all going to change. Yes.
I mean, certainly the connection that you and Jess have is very sort of, you know, it's massively strong within, you know, your different approaches to practice, although it's very different perhaps in outcome. And I just wonder, I mean, that this is a dialogue that, you know, you'll keep going.
Definitely. I think it's really great to have influence from someone who does something so different to me. I think like spending 3 years at university with people who do the same course as you end up all like moving almost in a similar direction, whereas I feel like we're moving apart but kind of influenced by each other. It's really interesting.
It is, and it's a very valuable connection as well.
Yeah, I wonder, it makes me wonder whether when Sarah and the people chose us to kind of have the studio, whether that was in the back of their mind, that maybe our work would be kind of resonate with one another.
Yeah, with link.
Did you know each other before?
No, never met. Yeah, they're like, hi, Rumi. But now we're genuinely very close friends. I think because it's been quite an intense, hard year, because we're obviously paying our rent through other ways, so we're doing other jobs and things. and then trying to be here as much as we possibly can. And then Jessie's the only other person that has experiences the same thing, so we've got lots of shared ground just in that. This is a fantastic opportunity, but also we're exhausted.
Yeah.
We're like, we're doing it, yeah, we've got a year.
Yeah, like I was saying, because, you know, after your degree course, I mean, I can remember being absolutely shattered. It was the last thing I wanted to do was, well, not quite the last thing, but certainly, you know, I just felt creatively drained.
Yeah.
It's like sometimes we want to come in and have a nap
We've
instead of
got,
actually doing anything.
we've got kind of an unofficial kind of slogan that's arisen, which is try again tomorrow. So we'll come in, sit there and be like, I'm not sure today what's going to happen, and we'll just try again tomorrow. And if you're in the space, something's mulling over, pop in,
Something's happening.
having for tea with your friend, try again tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, I think Sue McLean, she said, oh, the best way to regenerate myself was just sleeping.
Yeah.
You know, and we forget the importance of, you know, resting,
Yeah.
relaxing.
I'm going to have a serious holiday in September.
Yeah, holidays are an investment.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Can I just say, when did your exhibition? Can you just do it?
Oh, I've got an exhibition in the Window Gallery in August. I think the private is August the 2nd, and it's kind of looking back over the work that I've done this year and making these kind of connections between the kind of themes that I've discussed in terms of my individuality. It's called Vessel.
Are you doing a workshop?
Oh yes, I am. I'm doing 3 workshops. The last 3 Sundays of August. So not the first one because it's opening weekend, and then every other Sunday I'm doing kind of workshops about these kind of ideas. Which the first one's about the body, the second's about health, and the third's about the mind. I'm not sure what they're going to entail yet, but they're going to be good.
Well, we're definitely going to set up an alumni of the award on campus. To sort of try and create, a network of artists who've all been through the same thing. So it's just brilliant that you two were first.
Yeah,
Great experience here.
well, I think we should give them both a big now Spotlight takes a bit of a summer break, but of course you can always catch up with the films that Bernard so brilliantly documents the talks. They're on the website.